You're listening to Crossroads Church with Pastors Marcus and Natalie Avalos. The following message was recorded live at our Sunday morning services. For more information, go to www.crossroadsc.com or visit us in one of our Sunday morning services at 8:30, 10, and 11:30. And now prepare your hearts as we receive this morning's message.
Good morning. How's everybody? All right. So a few years ago, I was driving in Austin, and Austin, has just been exploding with growth. And I was at a wedding, and we had to go to this party after the wedding. What do you call those things? Reception. And I didn't know how to get where I was going, so I got the address, and I plugged it into my GPS. Now, this is one of these older GPSs, the Garmin kind that they don't automatically update like your phones. You remember those where you had to update them on your computer? And so I put in the address, and we started driving along to this, about a 30-minute drive to where we were going. And I'm driving along, just kind of zoned out, and all of a sudden up ahead, I see like a bunch of buildings right in the middle of the road. I'm like, what is going on here? So we slowly pull up, and I realize this is a toll booth right in the middle of this road. And I had put specifically on my GPS, I don't want to go through any toll roads. But all of a sudden, I pull up at this toll booth, and I get to the thing, and I say, hey, man, is this a toll road? He's like, yeah, it's a toll road. I was like, well, my GPS didn't say it was a toll road. He's like, well, it is. And he's like, you owe $2.50. I said, $2.50? I said, my GPS did not say this was a toll road. And he's like, well, it is, and it has been for quite some time, sir, and there's a lot of people lining up behind you, so it's $2.50. And I'm sitting there, I'm scrounging through trying to find $2.50, and I'm getting annoyed. So I give him the money, and I keep driving along, and I start thinking, I was like, I started actually getting more mad at myself because I realized that for the last 6 years, my GPS had been telling me I needed to update my maps. But in my mind, I'm thinking, how much does road change in 6 years? Then to add insult to injury, I had to pay more money to get off that stupid road. Now, this was a message to me because, there's a lot of times in life that life is changing really fast. And we get these warning signs sometimes, like, hey, you need to update a little bit maybe. Maybe it's time to change some things, update your map. But when we face change, what happens with most of us, right? I've found that we all tend to go, because look, the honest reality is nobody likes change. Even the ones that say they like change, you only like change on your terms. Right? So what happens for most of us, I've found, is when we get into a position where we know that stuff is changing around us, we either take one of two paths. We either ignore it. How much could things be changing, really? Do I really need to update this roadmap? We ignore it, act like it's not there. One of my dad's favorite statements is, there's no problem that won't go away if you just don't ignore it long enough. I was like, Dad, that's a horrible motto to live by. Some of us, we just ignore it. We say, well, I don't know. And others of us, we resist it, right? So here's what I know about you. In your life, there's some stuff that's changing right now. Okay? You look around, and you maybe don't like it. Maybe you look at your marriage, and you say, my husband has changed, and she wasn't, or my wife wasn't this way 20 years ago. She's changed. You see, and some of us, we ignore it. We say, man, I know things have changed, and we just kind of try and keep going like things used to be. Or we resist it, and we say, why, you've changed. You've changed. Now, the first thing I would say is, of course she's changed. She's 20 years older. Stuff happens, right? Guys change, and we all change. So maybe in your marriage, you're looking at it and you're saying, stuff has changed, and it's not the way it used to be. And I know some of you here at the church, you're saying, man, the church has changed. I miss the days when Marcus was up here all the time. Now it's that white guy who thinks he's Hispanic, right? And I would say, you guys need to stop thinking that way about Roy. I'm just kidding. Listen. Sabemos que por dentro. Es güero, ¿eh? It's a cocoa, right? I'm just kidding, Roy. We love you, man. All right, now that I've totally blown the course of things. I asked him permission to joke about him, by the way. So there's stuff changing. You say, man, my church is changing. You know, why can't we used to do the old hymns. I love those old hymns. And to that I would say, hey, you know that every hymn at one point was new and it was resisted by the people before it? Like all old music once was new music, right? So there's stuff that's changed. You're looking at your kids and you're saying, man, this is happening way too fast. My kid, she used to be so easy, she's a little baby. I could haul her around in a stroller, and now she's getting a little snippy, and she's like exerting her authority, and and maybe your kids, and you're just saying, man, life is changing. And so what happens is when stuff starts to change, we feel the tension inside of us, but we don't necessarily know what to do with it. And so some of us just ignore it until all of a sudden it just comes crushing down on us one day, and we flip out, right? And that's when people come to people like me, counselors, and they're like, oh my God, my world is falling apart, right? Well, actually, it's been falling apart for years. You've just been ignoring it, right? Sorry to speak so bluntly so early in the morning, but then some of people, they just resist it. They fiercely resist it. And they say, gosh darn it, man, this has gotten us to this point. We don't need to change anything. Why should we change anything? You know, it's good enough for me. It should be good enough for my kids. And your kids are like, you don't understand. It's not the same, Dad. And we live in this world that is constantly changing, and you just can't get around change. And we as Christians, I believe that we are supposed to be some of the most adaptable, flexible people there are to change. Because there's something that hangs in the balance if we refuse to change. And we're going to talk about that this morning. What hangs in the balance when we refuse to embrace change? Now, you know, Jesus, when he came along, he caused quite a stir. He caused quite a change. In fact, Israel had been operating by a set of rules for thousands of years that was given to them through Moses, the Old Covenant. And they were really good. They had a whole group of people that were professionals at keeping this Old Covenant. They were called these Pharisees, right? And the Pharisees, they were the ones that they figured out what God was wanting. They said, we're going to interpret the law of God, and we're going to live by that, because Israel is called to be a holy nation. We're called to be set apart, right? So for thousands of years, Israel is operating by this. But a few hundred years before Jesus came, a guy named Isaiah, he prophesies, and he wants to warn them, says, guys, I know you like the way things are. Like you've got this down. You've got this system down. You understand what I'm asking of you. But I need to warn you something. Remember not the former things, nor consider the things of old. He says, there's coming a point where you're going to have to kind of let go of the old days. Because behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth, don't you perceive it? I'm going to make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. He says, guys, I just want to give you fair warning. I don't change, but I'm about to change the way I work in the world. And I want you to be ready for it, because I'm actually about to make things a lot better. And if you hold on to the old way, you're going to live under condemnation, and you're going to feel left behind. But if you'll embrace what I'm about to do, some great things can happen in your life. But what happened? What happens to all of us? We don't like change. So Jesus shows up, and he starts doing all sorts of weird stuff. And the guys who are in charge of the old system are like, whoa, hold up. You can't be doing this. One example I love in Mark 2, it says, now John's disciples and the Pharisees, these are the guys that they were like the professional rule keepers, right? They knew the system. They kept with the system. They were fasting. So they for religious reasons, part of the Jewish tradition, they said, we're going to be fasting during this season of the year. And some people came along and asked Jesus, how is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees, they fast? Why aren't your boys fasting? What's the deal? You know our system. You know the system. We're all supposed to be fasting right now. And Jesus says something really weird. Okay? He says this bizarre thing. He says, how can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he's still with them? Like, what does that mean? They cannot. So as long as they have them with them, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast. Now, hold up. Now, so first he's saying, look, guys, first of all, I'm a really big deal, right? That's what Jesus is saying. I'm here to change some stuff, okay? And then he goes on to say this, and this is where this gets really interesting. He says, no one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Otherwise, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. Now, I know a lot of us, we actually now pay to have jeans that are with patches bought on them or holes ripped into them, right? But in the old days, you didn't just go out to Old Navy and buy a new pair of jeans, right? You would have to patch your clothes to make them last longer. And what he's saying is, look, if you put a piece of unshrunk cloth on a piece of cloth that you've been using for a long time, and you put that on, you sew it on there, as soon as that cloth starts to shrink, it's going to make the whole thing look odd. You have to shrink both things at the same time, right? And then he says this, he says, and no one pours new wine into old wineskins, otherwise the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. You know, wine, when they pour it in, grapes, as they're fermenting, anything as it's fermenting, it starts to expand. And he said, and back in the day, they have these animal skins that would hold the wine. But the problem with these animal skins is they would eventually get dried out. And if you tried to pour new wine in it, these animal skins, they would get really inflexible and they'd get rigid. And if you put the new wine in there, it would actually break the wine skin and you'd lose everything, right? So he's saying, listen, guys, you don't go doing this. You know better than to pour new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine and the wineskins will both be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins. Now, this is a weird response, right? They ask about fasting, and he's like, hey, let me tell you a little bit about sowing, right? Let's talk a little bit about how to make wine. What's this all about? What he's saying is, he's saying, guys, there are going to be times in life when I'm going to do things in a different way. In fact, I showed up here to change the game. That's what Jesus is saying. And throughout your life, as a Christian, there are going to be times when God, he doesn't change. He will never change who he is. Never. You can count on that. But you can count on the fact that he's going to change how he operates in your life from time to time. Because you're in a process. You're in a process of growing. And growth always requires change. Right? So the challenge for all of us is, man, I know it's uncomfortable, right? And some of us more than others, certain personality types, we just want things to be, we're just like, just make a decision so we can go with something, right? And then we want to stick with it, right? Even if, I'm not this way, but I have a lot of friends that are that way. They're like, let's just make a decision so we can go with it and then stick with it. And I don't want stuff to change. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you've got to be flexible because stuff is always changing. And I think one of the greatest ways this shows up in our lives is in our walk with God, okay? Now, I'm going to go really in depth here for some insider information, okay? So I want you to stick with me. If you can latch onto this, this could blow your mind, all right? When I share this with people, they're like, whoa, this is amazing, okay? It's not something I came up with. It's from a book called The Critical Journey by a lady named Janet Hagelberg and Robert Gulick. She basically says, hey, look, in your life of the Christian faith, you're constantly changing and you're constantly adapting and evolving in your relationship with God. And she lays out the stages in the walk of faith based on a lot of study, okay? Now, I want you to understand something about this. One of these is not better than the other, right? This is just this is not like, oh, you may be here, now you need to go to here, and you need to get right. What we're not saying, we're not trying to give you some sort of thing where, oh, maybe I can jump from stage 2 to stage 5. What I'm saying is this is the way your walk with God is naturally going to evolve based on research she's done. And here's how it goes down. The first step in the walk of faith is what's called recognition of God. Some of you are there right now. You all of a sudden have realized, oh my gosh, there is a God in heaven, and he loves me. And that's crazy that he loves me because I've done some really bad stuff. And I carry around a lot of guilt, and I carry around a lot of shame, and it's hard for you to imagine the fact that God loves you and has forgiven you. But that's that moment, it says recognition of God, and it is a sweet time when you have that realization that God has a plan for your life. And so it's like everything's new for you. And you come to church like, wow, I love the music. I love the preaching. I love it all. I love it all, right? And it's just amazing. And some of you right now, you're in this stage right now, and we're your recognition of God. Now, some of you are in what's called the life of discipleship stage. This is a stage where you've been walking with God maybe a few months, a few years. And now you've decided, man, I really want to learn about God's word. So you're locked in, and man, you've latched on to a preacher, or maybe there's somebody you listen to online, or maybe it's what we speak here at the church, and this is gold for you. Like everything that's shared here, this is solid gold truth for you. It's just like this is what it is, and you're growing in your walk with God, and you're starting to understand his grace, and you're starting to understand how he sees you. People here, it's a little bit different, and you kind of look back at people like here, and you go, at this stage, and you go, man, I remember when everything was so fresh and new, and it's not quite that way anymore, but man, I'm learning a lot of truth about God, right? Well, at some point, it shifts to what's called the productive life, or the life of action. This is where you all of a sudden start to realize, man, I know a lot about God, but now I feel like God's calling me to maybe do something for him. He's given me some gifts and talents and abilities, and maybe I'm supposed to be doing something with those. And this is when you start to maybe get involved in serving. And you start getting a little bit more involved in serving, and that's a natural process in this life of faith that you should start serving. And when you get here, sometimes you look back at these people like, oh, they don't really know anything. They're just happy-go-lucky, right? And you kind of moved past that, and you moved here, and you're like, yeah, I know the Bible and stuff, and you're maybe in this stage. And then what happens is what's called the journey inward. And you get to the journey inward, and this is the time where you start to look and you go, so I'm serving God. I know a lot about the Bible, but there's still some stuff in me that's not right. And you maybe start looking at some of your past history, and you start to look at some of the mindsets you have, and you start to maybe feel a little limited, and you go, why do I think the way I do? Like, why is it that I've gotten to this place and where I think this way? And you start to look a little inward. Maybe you look at some of your past hurts, some of the stuff that's happened to you. And then comes this moment called the wall. And the wall is its own stage, okay? The wall is where all of a sudden everything you thought you knew about God, it's changed. And you look and you start to even maybe question some of the stuff you learned back in this stage. And you start to go, man, back in this stage, God was answering all of my prayers. Like everything. Have you ever noticed how new Christians, they can pray, and God will answer pretty much anything for them? And those of us who've been walking with the Lord for a while are like, I just wish he'd just drop a brick on me or something. Show me you're still up there, right? The wall is St. John of the Cross. He was a famous thinker back in the Middle Ages. He said that he called this stage the dark night of the soul. And what drives us to the dark night of the soul a lot of times is when we expected God to do something and he didn't come through. And you start to go, who is this God? And is he really good? And you kind of start to rethink everything. You start to reshape your view of what God's here. And maybe it looks totally different. And here's the challenge in this stage of the wall. I work with a lot of people in the wall. I've been through the wall a couple times myself. There's no one answer for people in the wall. There's just not a clean answer. And so people back here will be like, you just need to read your Bible and pray. And you're like, I've been trying that. People over here are like, God is so good. Don't just rejoice in that. And people in the wall are like, no, it's not that simple, right? People over here are like, you just need to work harder. Just stop thinking about yourself and just serve. Being all introspective, that's your problem. People over here are like, you just need to serve. And people over here, they're like, yeah, I'm kind of starting to feel that way too, right? Now, eventually, you hold on to faith. You'll make it through the wall. You start to do the journey outward. It's where you start to see God in a different way, and then there's the life of love. But here's my point with all this. My point in all this isn't to be like, oh, maybe you're over here, maybe you're over here. My point is every one of us are at some stage in our walk with God. And where you are is a great stage to be in. Learn all you can right there. But at some point, stuff's going to change in your walk with God. And I've seen a lot of people, they start to question themselves and they question their faith when they get into one of these stages down here and go, man, this isn't quite what it used to be. And they kind of long. In fact, in the book, she talks about how some people, when they get to the wall, they just decide, this is too painful. I'm going to go back to easy answers. So they just jump back over somewhere in here and they're like, And they shut off that part of their mind that starts to question things. And I would say that's not the answer. The answer isn't to just go back to easy answers, right? And here's the interesting thing about this too. It's a little side note. Christians, we're so funny sometimes. Because all of these stages are real stages in people's lives. And there are some people who specifically are called to minister to people in this stage. Some who are called to minister to people in this stage. Some in this stage, some in this stage. So for example, let me talk about a guy that I really like, Joel Osteen. Joel hits people right here. Now people down here on the wall are like, that guy's way too happy. Like something's wrong with him. They're just in a different stage. And they're judging this guy over here for what God's called him to minister to these people over here. And you guys got like Rick Warren, he's all about the discipleship. And people are like, that's just too simplistic. You need to talk about. And then people over here are like, these people are too somber and morose. They're always like, what's wrong with these people? Like, serving God should be a happy and joyful thing, but they seem like it's a miserable thing, right? So every one of us were in these things, but here's the thing. We're all in the process of becoming who God wants us to be. And the stage you're in right now, embrace that stage, but just know that at some point, your walk with God's probably going to look a little different. Does that make sense? This is kind of heavy insider stuff. You don't normally just share this with people. This is stuff pastors talk about, but we don't usually share it with people because that's inside, kind of inside baseball stuff, all right? But I found this to be super helpful for me in understanding. Well, for one, as a writer, my first book, Vision Map, I wrote to people for the productive life. They say, man, I know there's something in me that God's called me to do, and I want to do something about it. So I wrote to people in this stage, right? There are some people that they're just not there yet, right? Then my next book, Full of You, I wrote to people here, The Journey Inward, where you start to look around and go, why is there still some stuff about me that I just can't get past, right? And Lord help me, I hope I never have to write to the wall, because that's a rough one to write to. But these are the stages that we go through. And again, one's not better than the other. It's just you are where you are. But be prepared for this. Your walk with God is going to change, because here's what God is doing in you. He's in the process of growing you into who he wants you to be. And growth requires change. Imagine this for a second. Imagine we've never met. You've never heard me speak. You don't know anything about me. And Pastor Marcus invites me to speak. He gets up here and he says, hey, there's this guy named Joel, and he's going to come in and speak to you guys, all right? So the video plays, and all of a sudden, here comes Joel. Hey, guys. So great to be with you guys this morning. Today we're going to talk about change. Now, if I came in like that, what's the first thing you'd ask? What's wrong with him? Right? And I'd be like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. Are you disabled or something? No. Well, what happened? Well, when I was 2, I learned how to crawl. And it was a little hard to learn how to crawl. I'd kind of roll over on my back. And I just decided, hey, man, crawling works for me. I mean, look, I'm really fast at it. Right? And you'd be like, what is wrong with him? Right? And I'd say to you, well, look, I mean, I can get around. I'm taking all the weight on 4 different appendages instead of 2. It seems pretty smart to me. And I mean, what could I possibly be missing out on? I can get around. I can move around. But the whole time you guys are going, what is wrong with him? Right? And no matter what I would say, you would constantly be thinking, that guy is odd. Because a healthy individual grows. And they push through the challenges of growth. And they don't stop at crawling and say, oh man, crawling was so hard, I don't think I want to learn how to walk. Or they don't stop at walking and say, man, I don't know if I want to learn how to ride a bike or learn how to swim. And if you can't swim, no judgment here, right? But there's all these levels of growth that requires stretching, and it's uncomfortable for us. But here's the thing that hangs in the balance if we refuse as Christians to change. If we all were like me, walking up here, crawling around, saying, that's good enough for me, crawling's good enough, that's good enough, that's all, what could I possibly miss out on? Here's the thing we miss out on, and here's what hangs in the balance if we refuse to embrace change in our lives. Influence. Because here's the thing. We live in a world that is constantly changing. And the danger that the danger we face is if we refuse to embrace the change and say, this is the way it needs to be. This is how it has to be. This is the way God worked last time, so clearly he wouldn't change that. And if we refuse to acknowledge that, we lose influence to the world around us, because you've all been around that person that, says, the old guy that says all these weird things. You're like, it's an old fogey, right? We don't listen to them. They'd have no influence in what they say to us. And they can say really powerful, potent things, but we're kind of like, yeah, but they're so out of touch. They're so out of touch. Because at some point, they refused to change and recognize that the world around them is changing. And listen, guys, we live in a world right now, we cannot afford to give up our influence. We live in a world that is hurting, a world that is angry, a world that is struggling. And guess what? Jesus is the answer. And he has called us to live out, to let our light shine before men, that they can see our good works and they can glorify our Father in heaven. And Lord knows you want this influence. You want this influence in your kids' life. You don't want your kids to be like, Mom and Dad, you don't understand. You just don't understand. It's not the same way. Well, back in my day, we walked to school uphill and downhill in the snow, or uphill twice in the snow, whatever, to school, right? And you're like, yeah, but now, Dad, no, that's not how it is. And you say, well, it's good enough for me. And we run this risk of getting too rigid. And what we do is we stop becoming teachable. And when you stop becoming teachable, you stop growing. Because there's always going to be something changing. And here's the thing, guys. The foundational truths that we believe, they don't change. What we believe about, like God does not change, right? The problem is we don't see the fullness of who God is. It says we see through a glass darkly right now, it says in Corinthians. So you can't see all of God, who God is, and he wants to show you the fullness of who he is. But it's going to look different than you probably think. And we can't afford to say, nope, this is the way it works every time. There are some things that don't change. Don't get me wrong. There are some things that it requires a balance, right? This is one of those challenging things that's frustrating because it's like, I wish I could tell you it's just this way. But we have to stay open and flexible and say, God, what is it that you're trying to teach me through the changes around me? And how can I keep my influence in the world around me to show people that I'm not out of touch with their pain? I'm not out of touch with their suffering. I'm not out of touch with whatever stage of their walk with God that I'm in. And when we're willing and adaptable and to change and we stay teachable, we retain our influence. I think about my dad. I talk about him all the time. But Dad, man, he was this way. He grew with me in the stages of my walk with God, and as I was growing up, and he talked differently to me, and I felt respected by him. I felt like he listened to my opinion. And yeah, there were some times where he knew I was being a total idiot. But he went along with me and he said, let's talk through that. He was open and teachable, listening to what's really going on in my mind. And yeah, man, my brain had not fully developed, so I was thinking some dumb stuff. But he didn't just go, no, that's dumb, move on, blah, blah, blah. He sat there and he wanted to learn. He listened and tried to learn. And that's one of the keys is we've got to be willing to listen and learn from those around us if we're going to keep influence with them. And the most dangerous thing we can do is like, no. This, again, listen to me. I value the Bible. I really value the Bible. But it drives me crazy when I see Christians on Facebook go, this is what the Bible says, and that's it. I'm done. And they have no relationship with the world around them. And they just post it on Facebook. And that's when we come across as condemning and judgmental. There's no relationship foundation for that, right? And that shows that just it rings of inflexibility. It rings of the fact that I don't want to listen to what you have to say. And I'm not really teachable anyways because the Bible told me. And I've got the corner on truth. But do you really? Do you really have the corner on truth? Do you know the whole Bible and all of its meaning back and forth? I don't. If you do, man, I'll give you my number. Let's talk, right? We're in the process of growing and understanding more and more of who Jesus is. Now, understand, some of you are going to take away from this. Is he not believing in the Bible? Look, I believe totally in the infallibility, and the Bible is the source of truth, right? But we've got to understand that, man, we have to remain flexible because God will often reveal himself in different ways in each generation. And he'll do it in different ways. He'll do it in different kinds of music. He'll do it in different kinds of preaching styles. He'll do it. He communicates his truth. He is forever relevant. And he will communicate his truth in different ways. And we've got to stay flexible and embrace that change because here's the good part about all of this. When we stay flexible, not only do we refuse to give up influence in this world, we remain as people of influence because we're in touch with the pain of those around us and we're learning from those around us what's going on, and we don't shelter ourselves off and say, I don't need to learn anymore, I don't need to understand anymore where you're coming from. But here's the other thing that's happening that's amazing about all of this. It says in 2 Corinthians, we who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory. Basically, he's saying he's growing you into his image, and you are becoming something incredibly glorious, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. God is in the process of making all of us into who we need to be, and that process requires change. It requires us embracing the new way he's doing things. It requires us being flexible. It requires us listening.
Thank you for listening to Crossroads Church. We trust this message enriched your life in some way. For more information, visit us on the web at www.crossroadsc.com. Or if you're in the area, come by and visit us on a Sunday morning at 8:30, 10, or 11:30 a.m. Crossroads Church, we're bringing a real God to real people.